Okay, this is a trial run before the computer plug in to see what happens. One day I was inbound from Essequibo, which is my home base in Guyana. It's about an hour and 15-minute flight, around 2,000 feet, and at 80 miles an hour on the step. In my airplane, everything happened between 40 and 80. I was empty, nothing with me or nobody with me. I was deadheading. I was about 20 minutes out of Essequibo on an hour and 15-minute flight to Georgetown. The control tower at Atkinson Field called me and said, 848, we have an aircraft missing in the Essequibo area. Failed to report his second contact reporting position. He had filed a flight plan saying he was going to fly the Essequibo River. The Rupununi was a Fairchild C-123 provider, twin engine, high wing, that was used in Vietnam to replace the DC-3 type aircraft, about the same size as the DC-3, but it had a ramp at the rear for loading instead of a side door like a DC-3 just had a side door. So the tower, when they called me, they asked if I could divert from my course about 20 miles to the east to pick up the Essequibo River and see if I could see anything along on my way in would indicate anything of an aircraft. So I did this, and I was tooling along down the Essequibo River, which is one of the biggest rivers in Guyana, and we were just coming up to a logging camp, the only one that's below the falls and below the escarpment where you can't get that's as far as you can go and still get logs to go for shipment overseas. The river was very low. Dry season has two seasons, two wet seasons, two rainy seasons they call them, and the river was really low, and there were big sand islands, sand completely that would be covered normally by 10 or 12 feet of water. This big sand island, I noticed something sparkly on there, and I headed right down towards it, and as I got closer I noticed it was an aircraft. It was sitting on the sand island, and there was two people standing outside the aircraft waving their arms, and I called the Atkinson control tower and told them there's an aircraft, a twin engine aircraft on the sandbank just below the logging camp in the Essequibo River. Two souls outside of the aircraft waving, so on. So I flashed my landing light and the guys waved back and so on. I lowered the top half of my door, window down, slowed down to approximately 40 miles an hour, and did a slow turn over the top of them. I was hollering at them if they were okay, if I was about 20-30 feet off the ground then. Hollered at them, see if they were okay. They hollered back, and I could hear them saying yes, and they were waving and shaking their heads. I held up the microphone, my mic, showed them the mic that I was in contact with the air traffic control at Atkinson Field, which that's a big word for that small place, because that's the only airport that has radio contact in the whole country of 83,000 square miles. So I circled a couple more times and so on, and turned on the landing light, and they waved like mad, like they didn't want me to land. And I think I could have landed and got off there okay, but not necessarily. There was no injuries or anything like that, so nobody was hurting. And I noticed a boat coming from the logging camp, just starting out a flat bottom 3-man, 4-man boat with an outboard engine on it. I could see the left engine the number one engine on the aircraft was feathered. So they lost an engine, and that was the best place, or the only place they could go without wrecking it, without killing themselves and so on. Lucky to get down on that island. Called Atkinson Field, and went after I notified them where they were at and so on. They said they would contact Demba, which was a bauxite company for sending the bauxite. Ship come up as far up the Mackenzie River. They had a float plane, an amphibious otter, at Demba, so they called Tom Wilson, which was a company pilot. He flew over and landed in the river and picked the two pilots up and so on. No injuries and everything, but the story got out. They were on charter Guyana Airways from Florida, and they were hauling oversized goods that couldn't be put in DC-3 to the Rupununi area, which we had done a couple of times with a C-46, but this time they were hauling like tractors and ambulances and things like that, wheel vehicles and so on. That's why they wanted this particular type of aircraft. They ended up, their airplane had 40 cases of whiskey going to Brazil, down right next to the airfield in Rupununi. That crossed over the river, and that was a town in Brazil that bought whiskey and brought it in to Guyana instead of the long way around up through Brazil and their taxes and so on. So it had 40 cases of whiskey on board in a tractor. Heard later in the stories after talked to the pilots and so on, found a week or so later, they tried to get they lost the engine. They got turned around and headed back. They were trying to make it back to Atkinson Field. The one engine, his aircraft was not good on one engine performance, and they were slightly overloaded with a tractor and 40 cases of whiskey and some other goods. Co-pilot went back and they lowered the ramp and tried to dump the tractor out the back. If they got rid of the tractor, they could have made it back to the field on one engine, but the tractor went halfway out the door and jammed, sitting on the ramp, and the pilot was doing everything possible to try to jerk it loose by bouncing the airplane around and so on, try to get rid, dump it out. They ended up, they committed themselves to the island, and just as they passed the logging camp, and maybe at 50 to 75 feet, the tractor finally fell out, but they couldn't climb on one engine. So they ended up on the sandbank. They were aiming for that anyhow. If they got rid of the tractor to start with, they could have made it back. But the aircraft was sitting there. It ended up, Tom picked up the two pilots and flew them back to Georgetown. They started organizing with their company in Florida for a replacement engine, hoping to be able to take it up and replace it on the sandbank and fly it out and save the aircraft. But when they got back up and so on and tried to organize it, getting the engine loosened up and ready to exchange engines and so on, after they made arrangements for an engine to be delivered down by a C-46. They couldn't find anybody at the logging camp or in the area that had boats that would take them out to the island where the airplane was sitting. Everybody was drunk. There wasn't no 40 cases of whiskey in the area on the airplane anymore. Most of the people in the area, indigenous people, Indians, are not supposed to drink anyhow. The real story. We used it as a spotter point. Even at high water, the tails was still sticking out of the river. For 4 or 5 years, I flew over it as a checkpoint. I don't know if it's still there now or not, but it was when I left. That was one of the only ones I know that people walked away from a emergency landing in that country. Oh, let's see what happens with this.
Yeah.
Just try for
that's a good one. Yeah.
a small story.
Yeah. Okay.
Now we're going to
Just push
how to stop.
stop. Just stop. Just stop it.